questions. Michael, first to you.
First, compliments to Samir and the panelists. I think this has been the most interesting panel of the weekend, so thank you very much. My question is to Dr. Jaishankar. You said, Dr. Jaishankar, you dissented from Ambassador Huntsman's point about the importance of states, and you said because of the importance of the great power of the office of President of the United States and because of the power of the United States in the world, the next 2 years, or even less than that, I think you said, is going to bring forth changes that will change the international system. And I felt the bar Montez sort of reverberating at that point. And I feel you teased us by saying that and not going a little further. So you have to give us a bit of a spoiler alert, Dr. Jaishankar, and tell us the nature of these changes that you foresee.
A permanent seat for India on the Security Council.
I think there was a mic there. Go ahead. Anna, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I just want to, being a former member of the European Parliament, I just want to highlight, and a former member of Portugal, of course, to highlight what Ms. Lana said because of the time that Europe trying to have an agreement. You spent 88 days negotiating a trade deal with India and 30 years with Europe. So this is our biggest mistake, and I am totally support with this idea. And I'm more with you about the idea that we need. I like the idea of the shock. This is a shock for us. I'm always saying about that. And I'm sick of
question.
The poetic speeches in Europe. I just want to highlight this because this is very important for us in Europe.
Okay, so that's a statement. But you know, I do know that negotiating an FTA is an end in itself. It doesn't need to lead to an FTA. The process is the end itself. Okay, you have to understand the idea behind it. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, thank you. Peter Gurk, Bled Strategic Forum. It was interesting for me because basically for the whole panel, nobody mentioned China. So probably this is the only panel where China, as one of the global powers, was not mentioned. So my question is pretty simple. Where does China fit in what Natalie was saying and also Minister Jaishankar in this new reality that we are finding ourselves in? Are they going to play the ball? Are they going to try to have an agreement on new rules which they would abide by? How is their connection with America going on, and so on and so on? Thanks.
You know, there's a famous saying that if the world is a casino, China is the house, and the house always wins. No matter who shakes the world, it's the house that takes the winnings. So I think thank you, Peter, for asking that. How is China going to respond to many of these developments? So maybe let's go down the panel. Let's start with you, President, because I know you have to leave a little earlier. So let me start with you, President.
Yeah, I'll just make two quick remarks. First one was the trade issue. I fully agree with you that Europe is way too slow in forging its trade agreements. Having said that, I think it has over 40 trade agreements with over 70 countries out of the 200 nation states in the world. So it does have the widest web of free trade agreements. But the way in which it behaves in these free trade agreements, it's simply unacceptable. You know, it just doesn't and shouldn't be like the way in which it is. The second point is on China. I had the privilege to spend 3.5 hours with President Xi Jinping on a state visit last October. I knew him from before. We spent 2 hours basically tete-a-tete discussing the world order. My starting point is obviously that China is the key player together with the United States. My point is that China always plays the long game. You know, for China, a century is only a page in a book, whereas, you know, we in the past 3 weeks have been shocked about the result of the US elections. He's probably looking there, come on, guys, this is only 4 years. Got nothing to worry about. What China has done is strategically extremely wise. So instead of taking the moral high ground, as we have in the West, towards the global South and elsewhere, it has created strategic relationships which are finance and infrastructure based. It is now the biggest creditor to 120 countries out of 200 in the world. China is also quite wise at playing the multilateral game. It does talk about multipolarity, etc. And of course, it always maximizes its own interests. The negative side of China, apart from the fact that I don't share many of the values portrayed by the Chinese leadership, but in my values-based realism, there's space for dialogue because you can't solve the world's big problems without China. For China, the main problem is going to be demography. The demographic curve of China is really, really bad, whereas the demographic curve for India is very, very good. And that means that they are actually going to be in a weaker position. But then I think a lot of this is I stop here, a lot of it is going to depend on who gets the technological oversight on it. But yeah.
Just on the FTA part, that if you count the top 10 largest trading relationships, none of them are based on an FTA. EU, US, US and China, China and Japan, Japan and US. You go across the world, look at the 10 biggest, 15 biggest trading relationships. They tend to operate outside FTAs. What I mean to say is we should try for an FTA, but let's get trade going.
Yeah.
Let's not make an excuse not to try.
Final point, in my mind, of course, the WTO should be the center of it. And actually trade is on the up, not on the down, as many people think. What I think will eventually happen if the Trump administration continues to threaten with trade barriers, tariffs, etc., not only is it going to hit the American general public and the actually stock markets, but what's going to start happening is the rest of the world trading around the United States. So, it'll go in different directions.
Natalie,
Well, I mean, it's actually a segue to what President Stubb was saying, and just adding a more specific European angle to the China question. I mean, I think, sort of prior to last November, the general direction of travel in Europe was indeed aligning with the United States, no longer being starry-eyed about China, realizing that indeed the economic security agenda, etc., had to be taken seriously. And this was the world of, perhaps not decoupling, but de-risking. I think now, because of everything that we've just been talking about, there is a growing sense of we can't really afford to have kind of 3 wars at the same time, right? And if we have one with Russia and we are increasingly in conflict with the United States, we may not like China, but perhaps this is the time to look at ways in which to cooperate with it. And I thought it was fascinating listening to Minister Wang Yi's statement yesterday after JD Vance and all of it. If you were to just take the snapshot, right, of yesterday and of course forget, sort of months and years before, indeed, all of a sudden China kind of comes across as Europe's best friend, right? Now, I'm not saying that we're going to, again, forget those months and years before, but I think, again, because of this growing transatlantic rift, there's going to be greater openness, provided that China plays well the game, and I think it is playing well the game, to actually look for ways of working with China.
But let me just inform you that your China addiction predates JD Vance. Europe has a China addiction which is far older, and you need to fix that irrespective of who's in the White House.
And we are in Bavaria.
Ambassador.
Well, Jay and I used to be neighbors in Beijing, where we first became friends. I would just say a couple of things. One, it was interesting that J.D. Vance did not mention China in his speech. So process that one for a moment. Number two, notwithstanding my vast disagreements with much of what China does and what they promote, it's a smart country.
Yeah.
And they thrive on a world full of ambiguity.
Yeah.
And they do so because there is zero ambiguity in their national strategy. They know exactly where they're going. And they task and implement and execute with precision. So a world of ambiguity plays to their strengths, which is shoring up relationships. I mean, the speech by Wang Yi, who I first got to know when he was head of the Taiwan Affairs Office, I've heard for 30 years. I mean, it's the same basic talking points, but it's a reassuring set of points about China's role in the world and we're fair play, level playing field, and all of that. So China will be a factor in everything we're talking about. They need to be drawn out in terms of problem solving around some of the major issues of the day. So let me just take you to the end point, where I can imagine a summit with Trump and Xi Jinping. And I've heard from Trump personally about his relationship with Xi Jinping. He thinks he has a good relationship with Xi Jinping, likes the man. So you can imagine them coming up at least for a holding pattern, a formulation for coexistence. But you can imagine the coexistence drawing China into maybe a Ukraine rebuild scenario or something like that. In other words, the US-China relationship has always operated better when there's been a large strategic construct to pursue, keeping us out of trouble. So I imagine that could be in our future.
So projectized relationship.
I'm somewhat optimistic about where that goes.
Lana.
I agree with much of what you just said. I think for a country like the UAE, we need a managed détente between China and the United States in the coming period, both for geopolitical and geoeconomic reasons. I think we need to avoid the Thucydides trap scenario. That is also something that has been a little bit of a clarion call for a number of countries and analysts recently. For us, we're the biggest trading partner for China in the Middle East and the re-export hub. We're also biggest trading partner for the United States. But for us, the United States is an indispensable strategic partner in the region, and we are always looking for ways to solidify that partnership. And China will always be an important economic player and partner. And I think we need both for economic growth, which is the buzzword of European reports this month. So I think this is good net for everybody. I think, big picture, if we can work with the United States and with China in also increasing the stake they have at these various tables in terms of peace and security, that would be a good net outcome for everyone. So that's the position of the UAE, and that's how we see the two countries. The last point would be on AI, which we've touched on briefly. Was DeepSeek a Sputnik moment? I don't know. The tech companies in the United States would say not. But our investment has been upward of $100 billion in American AI because we believe that, we're going to be moving from a period of geoeconomics to geotechnology, and that will define, and it should define in a good way, whether we all continue to economically prosper or not. So for the UAE, it's about everybody getting access to that, getting access to the data centers and being able to exponentially grow. That's a target for us.
Minister Jaishankar, you have a direct question from Michael, but also maybe on the rest of what you just heard.
I was kind of marveling at what I heard. So we have this values-based Europe very upset with Trumpian America. And because it's upset, guess what? They're going to turn to China. So there must be some great value-based connect between Europe and China.
Don't look at me. I mean, look. I have invested in this continent.
And then let's take this further. So there's this terrible law of the jungle out there. Okay, we can't deal with it. So let's stay with the law which we have. Now, what's that law, that game? It's been gamed by China. So the law-abiding, the rule-based order, the multilateral institution, which all of us, by the way, said that China is getting the best out of it. And we say, oh, by the way, we must defend that because the alternative is worse. So I'm left scratching my head a bit.
That a flawed democracy is not as good as an efficient authoritarian regime. I think that's the bottom line.
Stable monarchies, I've said this before.
Stable monarchies is where we are all reverting to.
Exactly.
That's where we are getting to.
Conclusion of panel.
So having said that, let me turn to Michael. Look, let's just reflect on life since November. Okay, and it's less than a month of this administration in office. So think there are another 20 odd months to go, at least. So what has been the conversation? Ukraine, Gaza, Greenland, Panama, tariffs. And you think the world order isn't changing? I mean, and this is less than a month in office.
But why Greenland? I mean, sorry.
Don't ask me. I neither said it nor own it. So the point is that at the end of the day, if there is, I think you used the word, Samir, about overheads. Okay, I found it very interesting that the first foreign policy engagement of this administration consciously was the Quad. Okay. What's so nice about the Quad? It has no overheads. It's a kind of it's going Dutch. Everybody comes, pays their bill, and it's fair, right? So, look, if we are looking actually at a different vision of architecture, a different sense of the power of the United States. If there is a, I don't know, I know Fatih Birol, who's left the room, was there, but some of you may have been at the earlier J.D. Vance speech in Paris on the AI Action Summit, or may have at least read it. There is a belief today in circles which count apparently in the United States, the best that I can make out, that US creativity, power, innovation is actually hamstrung by its commitments and relationships abroad. That if America was really unbound and allowed to, do its fullest, it would serve its interests much better. You may disagree with it or not, but there is such a belief, and it's a very dominant belief today out there. So if that's the belief, and if diplomacy is significantly shaped by overheads, if these are the kind of issues which are being addressed or at least put on the table fairly early on, tell me the world's not going to change.
The point is that you all have to watch out where you are in the American diplomatic budget sheet. Are you in the overheads or not? And I think that will decide your future.